Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Gerbrandt van Heerden. Gerry, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's a cloudy day here in Cape Town, but otherwise very good.
Excellent stuff. And joining us as well is once again Marius Roodt. Marius, I think this is the third time in a row you're on the show. How are you? How is the sunny East Rand?
Yeah, not too bad, and it's all very sunny. It's a very nice autumn day out here. And just like to let our listeners and viewers know that it's Harry's birthday today, so you're welcome to wish him happy birthday in the comments.
Excellent stuff.
Thank you, Marius.
All right, let's get into the news this week. It's a little bit of a shorter week because we do have Freedom Day on Thursday, and then we have Workers' Day on Monday next week. But this story caught me as, in some ways, the most interesting one, which I think demonstrates a lot of the problem, a lot of the way that that ideology is at the center of the failure to solve our problems in the country. And this is the Mafube municipality electricity system. So we did a story a little while ago on the show. We reported about the Mafube municipality in the Free State, which has a 25-year contract with a company, a private company called Rural Maintenance. And Rural Maintenance basically runs the municipality's distribution network for electricity rather than they doing it themselves. And this has proven so far to be extremely successful. I think they're about just under halfway through the project, through the contract. And the municipality has a large number of metrics in which it is doing better than other places. Now, this is a municipality that's not particularly well run. It's pretty rural. It's not super wealthy. It's got none of those things going for it. And yet it has a much more stable network. It has a much higher collection rate from its customers. A city like Tshwane, for example, only collects about 60% of the money that it's owed from its electricity customers. This one collects 100%. The only outstanding part in the municipality that doesn't pay the distribution company for the electricity is the municipality itself, which is quite funny. But it's also got all these sort of innovations for how to deal with load shedding. One of them is that it doesn't. It has a better schedule. It doesn't load shed certain critical infrastructure, like, for example, the local water pumping stations. And the company has invested an enormous amount of money in ensuring that the distribution network is in good condition. Well, all of this seems like it may be up in the air now because Eskom is not very happy. And there's one specific reason for that, which is that the municipality decided, or at least the distribution company, Rural Maintenance, decided to buy electricity from an independent power producer, in this case, a couple of solar farms. And Eskom is very upset by this. They say that these solar farms are not just providing electricity during load shedding, but they're supplying electricity at all times, which Eskom claims is, if they allow it to stand in this case, will encourage a large number of customers to want to do the same, and that the ability of Eskom to effectively manage the grid will therefore be severely compromised. So basically what they want is for these solar farms to not sell electricity during, they're only allowed to sell electricity during load shedding and not at any other time. But the solar farm owners say that this doesn't work out for them because then they won't be able to make a profit if they're not able to sell electricity at all hours. So Rural Maintenance is heading to court with Eskom to fight over this. However, the municipality has to give them legal standing to do this, has to basically give them an endorsement letter, and hasn't done so. So it looks like if the municipality doesn't do that quickly, the whole contract is going to fall apart possibly, and Eskom may be able to crush this little independent distributor, which has shown how decentralizing the electricity network can work and how it can be successful. Marius, let me start with you. For me, what really seems to be the problem here is the continued obsession with holding Eskom at the center of all of our electricity system, that we still need to go through Eskom for everything, that Eskom is just not willing to let go of any of the things that have actually proven to be a success. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, the heart of ANC ideology, where the state has to be in control of everything. And we see, there's a very large centralizing instinct within the ANC. We can see it with things such as hostility to federalism. And like I say, we had the, what's the word I'm looking for, is, concept of democratic centralism, which was quite big under Thabo Mbeki, where, everything was democratically decided, but it was actually decided by Thabo Mbeki and in the Thule House. And, that's actually how the ANC's always been and how it still is, I think. And Eskom is just a kind of a microcosm of this. So, it shouldn't surprise anybody. And it also just shows you failure of around various state institutions. If the municipality now can't even give this rural maintenance or whatever the organization is called letter, so they can go do this. It's probably, they've probably got to contact the municipality and they've been asking the guy, but he's probably got to get sign off from, a higher up or something, or it's sitting in somebody's desk, or, it's just, people are probably just sitting on their hands and not doing anything about it all. Yeah, it's one of those things, I kind of have a little bit of sympathy with Eskom, but this is also a rod they've made for their own back, because you can't blame anybody for trying to find other ways of, getting electricity supply. And, they're completely correct. If the municipality can allow this and get completely away from Eskom, then a lot of other places around the country will start doing that, I think. And, and this is an interesting thing. This is also an ANC municipality. It's not governing coalition. I'll just look now. The ANC's got a fairly comfortable majority on the town council there, and shows you. So these are even ANC municipalities that are trying to go away from Eskom. So I think Eskom is really, I think it is probably its death throes. And the problem is, I think it'll probably carry on as kind of a zombie organization for a while. So it'll effectively be dead, but it'll still be alive and still be, pulling resources in and so on.
To me, this just really shows, it's like, well, what are, as some of the people representing, I think AfriForum is involved in supporting this distribution company, are saying, isn't this sort of the plan to move Eskom away from, to move the country away from its total reliance on Eskom as a producer, as a distributor, as everything else, because it's just not capable of performing those roles. And so if Eskom wins this in court, you kind of sit and think to yourself, well, what are we supposed to do then? Are we just supposed to wait for Eskom to get its stuff together? What makes it even worse is the municipality, which already seems to be in pretty bad financial state, considering the fact that it owes this company millions in unpaid electricity, is liable for the costs if the contract falls apart now, which is pretty devastating. Harry, what do you make of this story?
Yeah, it just once again shows that, the whole self-fulfilling prophecy of Eskom or the government wants to control everything. They don't want anyone to, generate their own power, manage their own service delivery. And yet with the government failing so badly with service delivery, they're actually creating that environment for people to want to break away from the government, move away and do things themselves. I said earlier on the show that Africa is actually an environment where capitalism is actually thriving in rural communities because the governments are failing them so badly. So people are just fixing their own roads, generating their own power, maintaining their own water infrastructure. And, it just, like Marius said, it shows how strong that centralizing instinct is of the ANC, because, Nando's recently has started putting up signs saying that they're going to limit their menus, the options on their menus, because the power cuts are interfering with their chicken production and operations. And that's a huge problem, because chicken is a relatively affordable food product for many poor South Africans. And yet, once again, these, Eskom and these stage 6, stage 7 power outages hurting the poor the most, and Eskom and the government is just unwilling to allow private individuals and companies coming in to alleviate some of our energy issues. And, broadly, South Africa's economy is, we're supposed to be, I think, 20% larger. Our GDP is supposed to be 20% larger today than it actually is. And that's mainly because we've had load shedding in 2008 that has kept us from, growing at a sufficient, to have sufficient economic growth. And it just shows that the ANC is just putting party politics above the needs of South African citizens. And the only way we'll see reform is if a new coalition government, steps in, because it's not coming from the ANC.
So that 20% figure comes from an energy analyst called Clyde Mallinson, who calculated that our GDP is 20% lower than what it should be. And in the same period, Marius, you can really get a sense of the lost opportunities by looking at Kenya, for example, which pretty much doubled its GDP in the same period that South Africa essentially slid backwards. What are your final thoughts?
Yeah, that's a good point on Kenya, but also I think we must also remember that South Africa's economy is still far larger than Kenya's, on any measure, whether it's per capita
times.
But that said, Kenya its economy is doubling and growing, and whereas ours is, pretty much standing still. And South Africans in real terms are probably poorer than they were in 2013. And just imagine an economy that was 20% larger, how many fewer people would be living in poverty or would be unemployed, or, people wouldn't be able to get, people who wouldn't be able to get access to hospitals would be able to get it because there would have been money to expand hospitals or build more. It's got all kinds of knock-on effects. And, that's also at the end of the day, we must remember these poor decisions taken by the ANC government, it results in real people suffering. It's not just when you look at the unemployment numbers, cool, 35% of people unemployed, whatever. But there are people there who haven't worked, can't provide for their families, and all the kind of despair that, causes for a person, and kind of mental anguish and so on. And there are real consequences of the decisions, and same as real consequences to what's happened at Eskom. People, as all linked to the economy, and people not being able to reach their full potential. So, and it doesn't seem like the ANC's got any, I think it's sort of maybe starting to wake up if you listen to some of what's coming out of the governments, but I think might be too little too late.
So on that note, let's move on to our next story. And this is a continuing discussion that we've had over the past couple of episodes about the DA's so-called Moonshot Pact, which is what it says is an alliance of like-minded organizations working together to unseat the ANC and EFF potential coalition in 2024. Well, the ANC has come out very strongly against this, saying that the Moonshot Pact is against the transformation of South Africa. David Makura, who's currently the ANC's Political Education Committee co-coordinator, said, "The Moonshot Pact is an ideological issue. The DA is trying to gather all the forces which are profoundly and fundamentally opposed to the transformation of South Africa." The ANC says that it is going to form together a block of organizations which are going to counter the so-called Moonshot Pact. And he went on to say during this media briefing that anyone who thinks they can successfully exclude the ANC from building a vibrant SA where the economy grows and employs more people, we wish them good luck. That's the Moonshot Pact. Marius, what do you make of this? Do you think the ANC can produce its own sort of counter-coalition thing? It is kind of interesting to see that the ANC very much seems to be talking more in terms of future coalition partners openly now. They're not kind of, they seem to have at least given up the sure thing that they're going to be a majority party in the next election. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think it's still, the ANC still got a chance of getting more than 50% next year. I don't think it's a done deal that they're going to be under 50%. But any kind of ANC-led coalition is probably going to, the ANC, even if they are under 50, probably won't need to get a large number of parties to support it to carry on governing. Whereas a Moonshot coalition, I don't think it's going to get above 50%. That's not impossible. But any Moonshot coalition is going to be made up of, a large number of parties. It's going to be DA, Action SA, IFP, Freedom Front Plus, and so on. And that's also assuming somebody like the IFP will be solid member of a kind of wild dogs coalition, whatever the case is. But I think we also just mustn't be too surprised by what the ANC said. We're already kind of in electioneering season. I think political parties are already starting to gear up for next year's elections. And this kind of rhetoric has always come from the ANC. Even Nelson Mandela in the 90s said to people, don't vote for white parties, then the Democratic Party and the National Party. Cyril Ramaphosa said, if you vote for the DA, the Boer are going to bring apartheid back. So this is all just, same kind of rhetoric that the ANC always says during elections. It's this kind of fear-mongering about the white parties in inverted commas like the DA and whatever that they're going to bring back apartheid or they're going to take away people's social grants and all this kind of thing. So we mustn't, really read too much into it. I think it's something we're going to hear this kind of rhetoric. And I think a lot of people are starting to see through it. They know it's obviously not true. The DA is obviously not going to bring apartheid back. But yeah, and then I think it's just something that we're going to be seeing more and more of as we head into next year's elections. So yeah, it's not really something I think we need to be too get ourselves too worked up over. And just as you say, I think the ANC is starting to make peace with the fact that it's definitely going to have to govern Gauteng and the KwaZulu-Natal coalition, I think, if it's not voted out of power completely in those two provinces. And maybe even somewhere like the Northern Cape or maybe even the Free State. And like I say, I think it's about 50-50 chance that they're going to be under 50% in next year's national election. So it's something that the ANC is starting to, I think they're starting to realize that.
So I think it was you, Marius, who linked this piece, which had a whole bunch of different kind of what we might call mainstream political analysis in South Africa, just giving their views on the coalitions and the Moonshot Pact and stuff like that. And firstly, I just want to say some of it really annoyed me, particularly some of the things Stephen Friedman said, where he basically claimed that anyone who called South Africa a failed state was expressing some kind of racist anxiety. But that aside, one of the ideas that was brought up by the mainstream analysts is the idea that the ANC would not be able to survive any coalition with the EFF, that because the EFF is, in the words of one of the analysts, I think it was Nick Borain, not a growth party and a radical voice, that any coalition with it would split the ANC down the middle and allow a breakaway party to perhaps govern with a center coalition. In this case, I guess, the DA. Kerry, what do you make of that? That really strikes me as completely not a possibility. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I think the ANC is quite populist by their own right. And we've seen many members of the ANC actively push for, these socialist policies, expropriation without compensation, national health insurance. The EFF can give a little bit nudge, but I think there's a large portion of the ANC that actually aligns with the views of the EFF. And the ANC is, in their desperate attempt to cling on to power during this, as Marius said, election campaign, the campaign for elections has actually started already. The ANC says that coalition governments are generally unstable. We should have a majority party rule by the ANC. But I think, people are voting with their feet. If they're not voting at the voting booth, they are either going to the Western Cape DA-controlled municipalities, or they are, they're finally starting to vote for different smaller parties. I think people have gotten to such a point where they would prefer an unstable coalition government rather than a majority ANC government, because all over the country, ANC municipalities are failing at the most basic stuff. So yeah, I think I don't know. I think it will be quite disastrous if the country does see an ANC EFF coalition. We don't know how far they would be willing to go to implement some of the policies that they, some of the rhetoric and populist policies that they espouse. But I think overall, the mood in South Africans tend to be a moderate group of people. So the ANC and EFF coalition will be vastly out of touch with, I think, the majority of people on the ground.
Marius, one of the things put forward by some of the mainstream analysts is the idea that the ANC would prefer to go into coalition with the IFP. And I think there may be something to that, but I think it is interesting that the IFP does seem to be pretty open about its desire to join the Moonshot Pact rather than be in alliance with the ANC. But who knows? At the end of the day, no one can force a political party to choose its coalition partners after an election. What are your final thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think it's an ANC-IFP link-up is pretty possible. I mean, the ANC and IFP have worked together before. The IFP also got burnt working with the ANC. They governed after 1999, KwaZulu-Natal in coalition with IFP and ANC together. And the IFP since then just saw basic collapse in support. It used to get more than 50% of the vote in KwaZulu-Natal. Went down to as low as 10%, I think, in the 2014 election. But it's starting to grow again. It's doing very well in by-elections in KwaZulu-Natal. And we know that the IFP leans probably more to the DA side in terms of who'd like to work with, but it's not, wouldn't rule it out completely. So I think it's probably quite possible that we could see a ANC IFP link up. And just on the issue of, I think you said it was Nick Borain who said, there's the kind of moderate ANC would split off if we went with the EFF. Now that's really, it's such wishful thinking, and this moderate ANC that people think exists, you can maybe argue that it kind of existed in the 90s and early 2000s when it was quite pragmatic and kept spending down. And
we've had it before. It was called COPE.
Exactly. Or was the Mbeki ANC really? I mean, was the free market policies that all said though? There's still things like BE was introduced. We had the arms deal in the late 1990s. So it's still, there's this ANC that people think, this moderate ANC that's going to emerge. It doesn't exist. It never really has. You could maybe say some version of it sort of maybe existed 15 years ago, or between 1994 and 2007-8 maybe, but it doesn't exist. And it's really people who think there's going to be a break-off of this moderate ANC who's going to be like a kind of centrist organization with Cyril Ramaphosa at its helm are really, I don't know, I think we're talking about moonshots. I think these people are drinking moonshine if they think that. And we must also not forget that a lot of these very radical policies that have been coming forward have been while Cyril Ramaphosa has been president of South Africa and the ANC. He hasn't pushed back against things like EWC or NHR and all this kind of thing. And now the new employment equity bill was just signed by President Ramaphosa. So he has been pushing a lot of the, quite radical stuff that's been coming out of the ANC. So we mustn't think that Cyril Ramaphosa is actually this very, centrist guy who's actually very pro-free market. He's not. He's obviously, I don't think he's obviously not corrupt like Jacob Zuma was, but he's, I think ideologically he's maybe more to the left than Jacob Zuma.
Exactly. The ANC is not divided over ideology. It's divided over much more mundane things like personalities and who's in charge.
And other people have said that the ANC is split into two factions: those who want to outright steal your money, and the other ones who will make laws to take your money. So,
yeah, sort of the lawful versus the unlawful. Okay, let's move on to our next story, and this is one that's a bit concerning. And you'll see why in a second. So South Africa is being outcompeted by other countries in mining. Now, I'm sure anyone who's paid any attention to the mining industry in South Africa knows that that's the case. But what's very concerning is that it's not just countries like Australia, which have the rule of law and are relatively well run and have a clear regulatory framework and are not actively hostile to business like our government seems to be. But even countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo seem like they are beginning to push ahead of South Africa. And there's an example of there is a platinum mine which is owned by a Chinese multinational company, which was recently complaining that its project in South Africa is much less successful than its projects in the DRC. This Chinese company, Xinjiang Mining, says that it's taken 7 years to get a Limpopo mining project essentially to the point where it's beginning to produce some kind of resources. Whereas in the DRC, it was, I think, like a year or slightly over to get a copper mine working there, and it's now well into production. When you consider the DRC is effectively a failed state, this is, I think, quite the indictment on our own mining industry. We should be leagues ahead of of a place like this where, you know, warlords show up to your front door to collect payment. But our system is so slow in processing applications, in setting clear rules, and in just generally having an unfriendly environment to investors. The companies are willing to take a risk on a place like the Democratic Republic of Congo rather than South Africa. Kerry, what's your take on all this?
I think it's a bit of irony that, you know, a few decades ago, or even like 15 years ago, you know, South Africa was like the economic heavyweight and carrying the entire continent. And now I think it was it a World Bank estimate or a IMF estimate where they kind of showed an average of the region's average in GDP growth. And they stated that it was 3% for sub-Saharan Africa. But if you take South Africa out of that, then suddenly the GDP growth estimate increases to 5%. So South Africa literally is just dragging the entire continent down with our very, very bad how we're managing our own economy. And it's because of our regulations and our red tape. I think countries such as Rwanda and East Africa are really starting to outperform us on every economic metric, because they realize that, you know, in order for economies to really prosper, you need to allow the government to, you know, not intervene as much and make it a bit easier for business and investors to, you know, come in and create jobs and create opportunities. That's why we're seeing, you know, Nairobi and Kenya becoming, I think they're becoming like almost a new gateway to Africa, even though their economy is like 4 times smaller than ours. They are definitely increasing at a rapid rate, and we're just falling behind. And yeah, it's a tragic irony almost. Yeah.
One of the great stats from this article, I think it was a Business Day piece, which had has this fact about how in Botswana it takes about 40 days for a prospecting license to be approved. In South Africa, it's more than 300 working days. Yeah. Marius, what do you make of all this?
Yeah, I'll just say I think we should also take that article maybe with a slight pinch of salt. I was just looking at the Fraser Institute's ranking of mining jurisdictions. So that's where they survey mining executives from around the world and ask them where the worst places are in the world to do, you know, invest in mining. And the DRC is, according to the survey, is the 3rd worst in the world. But South Africa's not doing much better. We're the 10th worst. So we shouldn't be too... yeah, but
we shouldn't even be in the same list.
No, exactly. But I mean, so I think maybe take that kind of thing with a pinch of salt, but it's also, I mean, we shouldn't be the 10th worst in the world to, you know, do investing. But just as a very interesting aside, Zimbabwe is the worst place in the world to do mining, according to this survey. 2nd worst place in the world is Spain. So that's quite something, I think.
All right. I don't think we have time for our last one, except just to say that this is one of those stories that we'll have to keep an eye on. There is a civil war breaking out in Sudan over the past couple of weeks, and apparently 77 South Africans are still trapped in the country, including some embassy staff as well. They have not been evacuated yet. However, and this is, I found this really amusing. The spokesperson for government said that, no, it's fine. They had now managed to get all of the South Africans in the country into the same WhatsApp group to coordinate their evacuation, which I think is being done with the help of the Gift of the Givers charity as well as the Tanzanian government. So hopefully everyone there gets out without too much trouble or risk. And that is all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for listening. And we hope you found the show interesting. We will be back tomorrow, of course, on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.